A taxi ride that lasted a lifetime. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The night was soaked in rain, the kind that turns the city lights into streaks of gold and blue across the wet asphalt. Ethan Cole, a tired taxi driver with a 3-day beard and eyes that had forgotten what sleep felt like, pulled his yellow cab to the curb outside the Astoria Grand Hotel. It was almost midnight. His shift was supposed to end an hour ago, but Bills did not care about exhaustion. That was when she appeared, Clara Hayes, the woman whose face was printed on half the business magazines in New York. Her silk dress clung to her in the rain, her heels clicking sharply as she rushed under the flickering canopy light. She looked lost, furious, and heartbreakingly human. Ethan leaned out the window. "Need a ride, ma'am?" She hesitated, rain dripping from her hair. "Yes. Anywhere but here." Her voice cracked just slightly. He unlocked the door without another word. Inside the cab, the silence was thick except for the rhythmic slap of windshield wipers. Clara stared out the window as if the city itself had betrayed her. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Rough night?" he asked quietly. She exhaled a shaky breath. "You could say that. I just walked away from an engagement party that was never about love." Her fingers trembled as she pulled off a diamond ring and set it on the seat beside her. The street light caught the stone, scattering fractured light across the cracked leather. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You left him?" She gave a bitter laugh. "No. I left the version of myself they wanted me to be." He did not answer, just nodded slowly. They drove in silence until the rain softened to a mist. The city thinned out, replaced by quiet streets and neon diners. She looked up suddenly. "Do you believe in people marrying for business, Mr. Taxi Driver?" He smiled faintly at the road ahead. "I believe people forget why they started running, and sometimes they marry the wrong finish line." She turned to look at him, truly seeing him for the first time. His hands were rough, his uniform worn, but there was calm strength in his voice. "You are not like most men," she murmured. "I am not rich enough to be," he replied simply. A small, genuine laugh escaped her lips, the first in months. When the cab finally stopped in front of her penthouse, she reached for her purse, but Ethan shook his head. "You already paid," he said. She frowned. "I have not." He met her eyes in the mirror. "You did. You reminded me that honesty still exists somewhere in this city." She stared, speechless. Before she could speak, he nodded politely and drove away, leaving her standing in the rain with her ring still on the back seat. Hours later, Clara Hayes would stare at that empty space in her car, the faint smell of old leather and rainwater clinging to her memory. She would not know why she could not stop thinking about that taxi driver, the man who asked for nothing when everyone else wanted everything. And tomorrow morning, her world would tilt again, because she would look him up, find him, and offer him something he never expected: a marriage contract that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the city was gray and restless, the kind of morning where the sky looked tired. Ethan parked his cab outside a small diner on Fifth Avenue, sipping black coffee from a paper cup that had lost its heat. The night before felt like a dream, but the faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the back seat. He tried to shake it off. Women like her did not think about men like him. He checked his watch, then his bank account on his cracked phone. The numbers were smaller than ever. The mortgage notice would come any day now, and his daughter Lily's tuition was already overdue. He rubbed his eyes and muttered to himself, "One more shift, Ethan. Just one more." At that same moment across town, Clara Hayes sat in her glass-walled office high above Manhattan, but for the first time, the view meant nothing. Her engagement had been arranged to merge two companies. Her family's legacy, Hayes Industries, was on the verge of being taken by the board if she could not stabilize it. The media frenzy after last night's broken engagement had already begun. Her assistant entered softly. "Ms. Hayes, the shareholders' meeting is scheduled for 3. They are demanding to know about your marital status clause." Clara exhaled slowly, her expression unreadable. "Prepare a statement. I will give them one." Hours later, as dusk fell, Ethan was cleaning the dashboard of his cab when a black SUV stopped beside him. A man in a suit stepped out and said, "Mr. Cole? Miss Clara Hayes would like to speak with you." Ethan froze. "I think you have the wrong guy." The man smiled politely. "You drove her last night. She insists it is you." Against his better judgment, Ethan followed the man to a towering glass building. The lobby gleamed like a mirror. He felt out of place, his worn jacket and boots drawing stares from people in suits. When the elevator doors opened, Clara was already there, standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, turning toward him. "Thank you for coming." Ethan's voice was cautious. "You left your ring in my cab." "Keep it," she said, her tone calm but strange. "I did not ask you here for that." She stepped closer, her perfume sharp yet warm. "I need your help." Ethan frowned. "My help? I am just a driver." "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "You are the only honest man I have met in years." Her words hung in the air like something fragile. She gestured toward a document on the table. "This is a contract. I need a husband. Not forever. Just for 6 months, until my board renews my position." Ethan blinked, thinking he had misheard. "You want me to pretend to be your husband?" "Yes," she said simply. "In return, I will pay off your mortgage and fund your daughter's college education. Everything will be legal, discreet, and temporary." He laughed in disbelief. "Why me?" "Because you have nothing to gain by lying," she said, her voice steady. "And maybe, that is exactly what I need." Ethan stared at the paper, his heartbeat quickening. The idea was insane, but the desperation in her eyes was real. "You do not even know me," he whispered. "I know enough," she replied. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she added, "You have until tomorrow to decide." As he left her office, the city lights reflected off the rain-soaked streets again. The same streets where they had first met. Ethan climbed into his cab, gripping the steering wheel, his mind spinning. The offer was wrong, reckless, and yet it was the first lifeline he had been given in years. He looked up at the rearview mirror, at the empty seat where she had once sat, and muttered, "What are you doing, Ethan?" But even as he drove into the night, he already knew he would go back. Because something about Clara Hayes felt like a storm he could not drive away from. The next day, Ethan showed up at Hayes Tower with the same unease one feels before walking into a storm. He had spent the night staring at the contract, thinking about Lily asleep in the next room, her school forms stacked beside overdue bills. By morning, the decision was made. When the elevator doors opened to the top floor, Clara was already waiting, perfectly composed in a navy suit, her hair pulled back with precision. She looked every bit the CEO the world expected her to be. Ethan held out the signed papers. "I guess this makes us business partners," he said quietly. Clara studied him for a moment before giving a faint smile. "No, Mr. Cole. For the next 6 months, it makes us husband and wife." A team of lawyers entered, their pens scratching across the copies as witnesses. When it was done, Clara extended her hand, her tone professional. "Welcome to the arrangement." Ethan shook it, his rough fingers brushing against her manicured ones. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "you learn how to look like you belong." Within hours, his life transformed. Tailors took his measurements, stylists fussed over his hair, and a publicist rehearsed him through interviews. He felt like an imposter in a stranger's skin, yet Clara moved through the chaos with surgical calm. That evening, she introduced him to the mansion that would serve as their shared home. It was silent, spacious, and cold, filled with art pieces that looked too expensive to touch. Ethan stood in the marble foyer, feeling small. "You live here alone?" he asked. "I used to," she said softly, then turned away before he could see the flicker of loneliness in her eyes. They dined at a long table where the silence between them was louder than the clink of silverware. Clara spoke first. "There will be public events, fundraisers, board dinners, interviews. You will accompany me, smile when I need you to, and keep the story clean." Ethan nodded. "And in private?" She met his gaze. "In private, we stay out of each other's way." He nodded again, though a quiet part of him already wondered if that would be possible. That night, Ethan wandered through the guest wing assigned to him. The city lights glittered beyond the tall windows, and for a moment he caught sight of Clara standing alone on the balcony, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I did what I had to," she said, her voice low. "It is temporary." Then silence. She turned slightly, catching his reflection in the glass. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she spoke without turning around. "Do not read too much into this, Mr. Cole. It is just business." He exhaled, nodding even though she could not see him. "Understood, Ms. Hayes." The next morning came with headlines. "Mysterious husband appears beside Clara Hayes." Photographers crowded the lobby when they stepped out together. Clara's hand slipped through Ethan's arm as if they had done this 1,000 times. Her smile was perfect, practiced. His was nervous but sincere. Inside the car, after the cameras faded, she finally let out a breath. "You did well," she said. "For a man who hates suits." He glanced at her. "For a woman who hates pretending, you are good at it." She smirked faintly. "Comes with the territory." They drove in silence, but something had shifted, a fragile understanding, maybe respect, or the beginning of something neither dared to name. Later that night, Ethan returned to his room and found a handwritten note on his dresser. It read, "Thank you for showing up." "See," he smiled, tucking it into his wallet. For the first time in years, the walls around both their hearts began to tremble, just slightly. Weeks passed, and the arrangement between Clara and Ethan began to settle into a rhythm. Every morning he would ride with her to the office, dressed in tailored suits that still felt like costumes, and every evening they would return to the silent mansion where two worlds quietly collided. The house staff learned to stay discreet, and soon the city began to believe the illusion. Clara Hayes and her mysterious husband were the talk of Wall Street. Yet behind the closed doors, they were strangers living parallel lives. One Thursday night, Clara came home late from a board dinner. Ethan was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, cooking simple pasta. The smell of garlic and olive oil filled the air, something warm and human that did not belong in a house of glass and marble. She paused at the doorway, watching him. "You cook?" she asked, her voice curious. He looked over his shoulder. "Some nights. It helps me think." She smiled faintly and took a seat at the counter. "What do you think about?" "How people like us end up pretending to be something we are not," he said. She met his eyes, the flicker of a smile fading. "Speak for yourself, Mr. Cole." But she still stayed. He served her a plate, and they ate together quietly, two people bound by a lie that was starting to feel less like fiction. Later that week came their first major test, a charity gala filled with investors, reporters, and rivals. Clara, radiant in a silver gown, entered the ballroom with Ethan beside her, his arm steady around hers. The cameras flashed, questions fired from every direction. "Mrs. Hayes, how did you two meet?" a reporter shouted. Clara opened her mouth, but Ethan spoke first. "She was my passenger," he said calmly. "One ride that never really ended." The crowd laughed, charmed. Clara turned to him, surprised. For the first time in months, her smile was not practiced. Inside the ballroom, they danced to a slow jazz number. Ethan whispered, "You are shaking." She smiled through clenched teeth. "I hate being watched." He lowered his voice. "Then just look at me." For a brief, impossible moment, the noise of the room faded, and all that existed was the rhythm of their steps and the warmth of her hand in his. But the spell broke when a man approached Victor Lang, Clara's ex-fiancé, the one she had left at the altar of ambition. "Clara," he said smoothly, "so this is the husband who replaced me? Interesting choice." Ethan extended his hand, steady. "Good evening." Victor smirked. "Tell me, Mr. Cole, do you know the difference between a chauffeur and a partner? One drives, the other decides where to go." The insult hung in the air. Clara's face flushed with anger, but Ethan only smiled faintly. "Then I suppose the best journeys are the ones taken together," he said. The onlookers chuckled. Victor's smirk faltered. Clara looked at Ethan with something unspoken in her eyes, gratitude, admiration, perhaps the first crack in her armor. That night, when they returned home, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window. "You did not have to defend me," she said softly. Ethan replied, "You did not need saving. I just could not let him rewrite your story." She turned, meeting his gaze. "You talk like you actually care." "Maybe I do," he said. Silence stretched, heavy and electric. Then she whispered, "This was supposed to be a contract, Mr. Cole. Do not complicate it." He smiled gently. "Too late, Mrs. Hayes." She did not reply, but when she left the room, her hand brushed his just long enough to leave him wondering whether their fake marriage had just crossed its first real line. In the weeks that followed the gala, something subtle began to change inside the Hayes mansion. The silence that once filled its marble halls was now broken by laughter, quiet conversations, and the sound of two people learning to breathe in the same space. Ethan had become more than an accessory to Clara's image, he had become a steady rhythm in her chaotic world. He made coffee in the mornings, left notes on her desk before she left for work, and drove her himself when the driver called out sick. Clara found herself waiting for those small gestures without realizing it. One evening, she came home early and found him teaching the housekeeper's son how to fix a broken toy car in the garage. She stood there unseen for a moment, watching the way Ethan's patience transformed the boy's frustration into joy. It stirred something in her she had not felt in years. Later that night, over dinner, she asked quietly, "Do you miss your old life?" Ethan looked up from his plate. "Sometimes. But lately, I am not sure which one that is anymore." Her lips parted, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Victor Lang. The board had called an emergency meeting. Rumors about their marriage being fake had begun to circulate. Her stomach dropped. "They are coming for me," she murmured. Ethan frowned. "Then we will face them." The next day, the boardroom was tense. Victor sat at the far end of the table, smirking. "Ms. Hayes," he began smoothly, "we have received allegations that your marriage is not legitimate. If true, it would violate the company's leadership clause." Clara's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Before she could speak, Ethan rose from his chair. "Our marriage is as real as the company she built from the ground up," he said firmly. "You can question her business decisions, but not her integrity." Cameras flashed. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Clara's eyes glistened, but she kept her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she said softly. After the meeting, they stood in the parking lot, the weight of the day pressing down on them. Clara turned to him. "You did not have to do that." He met her gaze. "Maybe I wanted to." The city lights reflected in her eyes as she whispered, "You are making this harder than it is supposed to be." Ethan smiled faintly. Then maybe it was never supposed to be easy. That night, the tension between them reached its quiet peak. Rain pattered softly against the windows as Clara sat by the fireplace, a glass of wine untouched beside her. Ethan walked in, his tie undone, his eyes tired but warm. "You should rest," he said. She looked up, her voice almost a whisper. Do you ever wonder what would happen if this were not pretend? He froze. The question hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Every day, he admitted. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she stood, crossing the room slowly. Her hand brushed his sleeve, lingering. Good night, Ethan, she said, her voice trembling just enough for him to hear what she did not say. He watched her leave, his heart pounding with the realization that the line between contract and love had already blurred beyond repair. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and endless, like the beginning of something neither of them could stop. The days that followed were quieter, heavier. The unspoken words between Clara and Ethan hung in the air like fog, thick enough to feel but impossible to clear. They still played their parts in public, smiling for the cameras, attending meetings, and arriving hand in hand at events, but something deeper had shifted. What began as a contract was now a fragile heartbeat neither of them dared to name. One late evening, after a grueling day at the office, Clara found Ethan sitting on the balcony, his sleeves rolled up, a mug of coffee in his hand. The city glimmered below them like a sea of stars. You are still awake, she said softly, stepping closer. Could not sleep, he replied. Too much noise in my head. She leaned against the railing beside him, her voice quiet. Do you ever miss being unknown? He smiled faintly. Every time a camera flashes. They stood in silence for a while, the sound of the wind between them. Then, almost without thinking, she whispered, You are the first person who ever made me feel seen. Ethan turned, surprised by the vulnerability in her tone. You are the first person who ever looked past what I do, he said. She laughed softly, a sound both sad and sweet. Maybe that is why this hurts. Why, what hurts? He asked. She met his eyes, and for a moment, the mask slipped. Caring, she said simply. Before he could answer, her phone buzzed sharply. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. It is Victor. He is threatening to expose our contract to the press if I do not step down. Ethan's jaw tightened. Let me handle it. No, she said firmly. If this comes out, everything I built will collapse. The board will strip me of control. He shook his head. Then let them try. You have done nothing wrong. But she was already pacing, her mind racing through possible outcomes. Later that night, when Ethan went to check on her, she was sitting alone in her office, staring at an old photo of her parents, the founders of Hayes Industries. They built this company with integrity, she murmured. And I turned it into a performance. Ethan walked closer. You built it out of survival, not greed. There is a difference. She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. You always know what to say. He smiled gently. It is a driver's job to know when someone needs directions. That earned him a soft laugh. But as their laughter faded, the reality of the storm ahead settled in. The next morning, headlines broke. Anonymous source claims Clara Hayes' marriage is fake. The photo from the gala was splashed across every business site. Ethan arrived at her office just as chaos erupted, calls from investors, angry emails from the board. Clara stood in the middle of it, pale but composed. It has begun, she said quietly. Victor leaked it. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Then we fight back. No, she said, shaking her head. If we deny it, we look guilty. If we admit it, we lose everything. He stepped closer. Then maybe the truth is the only way out. She looked up at him, tears threatening but unshed. The truth could destroy us both. He took a slow breath, or it could set us free. For a long time, they just stood there, two people bound by a lie that had somehow become the most honest thing in their lives. Outside, the cameras were already gathering, waiting for their downfall. Inside, Ethan reached for her hand. Whatever happens, I am not walking away. She looked at him, her voice trembling. Even if it ruins you? He smiled. You were the best detour my life ever took. And for the first time, Clara Hayes let herself believe that maybe love was not a weakness but a way to survive the storm. The next morning came like a storm breaking through glass. Reporters swarmed the entrance of Hayes Tower, their microphones thrust forward as Clara and Ethan stepped out of the car. Is it true your marriage is fake? One shouted. Was it all a publicity stunt? Another demanded. Clara's shoulders were squared, her chin high, but Ethan could see the tremor in her hand. He moved closer, shielding her from the flashes. Inside, the boardroom was already in session. Victor Lang sat smugly at the center, a stack of printed headlines in front of him. Ms. Hayes, he said with mock sympathy, for the sake of the company's reputation, I suggest you resign before the press buries us. The other board members whispered among themselves. Clara stood tall, her voice calm but cold. I will not resign. Victor leaned back, smiling. Then prove the marriage is real. Bring us something tangible. A certificate, a witness, anything. She hesitated. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on the table. You want proof? I will give you proof. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph, one that Clara had never seen. It was of Lily, his daughter, sitting beside a smiling Clara from a charity event weeks ago. They looked like a family. The boardroom fell silent. We did not plan that, Ethan said. It just happened. Because sometimes, what begins as a lie turns into something real. Victor's smirk faded. But before Clara could speak, one of the board members raised his hand. The media will not care about photographs. The company's shares are dropping by the hour. Clara's breath shook, but she met their eyes. Then I will face them myself. That afternoon, she called a press conference. The room was filled with cameras, the air tense. Ethan stood just behind her as she stepped up to the podium. For months, the world has speculated about my marriage, she began. Yes, it started as an arrangement. I will not deny it. But what I did not expect was to find honesty, loyalty, and love in the very place I thought least possible. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara continued, her voice firm. Judge me if you must, but I will not apologize for protecting the company my parents built, or for falling in love with the man who reminded me why integrity matters. The flashes went wild. Ethan's chest tightened with pride. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes before finishing, this is not a scandal. It is a story about redemption. As they left the stage, Victor stormed forward. You think this speech will save you? The shareholders will never trust you again. Clara's expression was calm. Then let them see the results. Hours later, news broke that Hayes Industries stock had stabilized. Investors praised her transparency, calling her the most human CEO in the city. That night, as the city quieted, Clara and Ethan sat side by side in the mansion's garden. You saved us, he said softly. She shook her head. No, we saved each other. The moonlight brushed her face, and for the first time, the walls between them felt gone. So, he said with a small smile, does this mean the contract is over? She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe it never mattered. And somewhere in the distance, the city they had both learned to survive in finally felt like home. Weeks later, life inside the Hayes mansion no longer felt like a performance. The cameras had turned away, the rumors had faded, and for the first time, Clara and Ethan were free from pretending. Yet freedom did not come without questions. One morning, Ethan found Clara standing by the window, sunlight tracing the edge of her face. She looked peaceful but distant, lost in thought. You have been quiet lately, he said gently. She turned toward him, her smile faint. Quiet feels strange when you have spent years fighting noise. He stepped closer. You are still fighting, Clara. Just not alone anymore. She exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of tension. Do you ever wonder what happens after the story ends? He chuckled softly. Maybe it does not end. Maybe it just changes shape. That night, they attended a charity dinner together, this time by choice, not obligation. The room was filled with laughter, soft music, and people who once doubted her now lining up to shake her hand. When Ethan stepped away to greet an old friend, a woman approached Clara, a reporter she recognized from months ago. "Ms. Hayes," the reporter said kindly, "people want to know, are you still married?" Clara smiled, her answer calm and sure. "We are not playing pretend anymore. Whatever this is, it is real." Across the room, Ethan caught her eye. Their gazes locked through the crowd, and in that silent moment, it was clear to everyone watching that the story of Clara Hayes and Ethan Cole had never been about power, but about choosing each other when the world expected them to fall apart. Later that night, back at the mansion, Ethan found her sitting by the fire, the flickering light soft against her skin. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's breath caught. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He smiled. "Ending what we started on paper." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring, nothing like the diamonds she once wore. No contracts. No clauses. Just choice. She looked at him, tears forming but her voice steady. "Are you sure? After everything?" He nodded. "You showed me that love is not about saving or being saved. It is about standing still when everything else falls apart." Clara reached out, her fingers trembling as she took the ring. "Then I choose you too." He slid it onto her finger, and for the first time, neither of them felt like imposters in their own lives. The world outside could spin, the rumors could return, but inside that quiet house, they had found something unshakable. Later, as they sat together watching the fire burn low, Clara whispered, "You once told me some rides never end." Ethan smiled, pulling her closer. "That is right. Some do not have a destination. They just become home." And in that soft glow, surrounded by warmth instead of marble silence, they finally knew their journey had just begun. A year later, the city looked different through Ethan's eyes. The same streets that once felt endless now carried memories instead of burdens. The yellow cab he used to drive sat restored in the corner of their garden, its paint polished, its license plate glinting under the morning sun. On its hood, a small silver plaque read, "The ride that lasted a lifetime." Inside the mansion, laughter echoed down the hallway as Clara rushed from room to room, papers in one hand, a bouquet of white lilies in the other. Today was the opening of the Hayes Foundation for Single Parents, a dream Ethan once thought too impossible to speak aloud. The foundation would help families like his had been, those standing on the edge of losing everything. "Are you ready?" he asked from the doorway, adjusting his tie. Clara turned to him, smiling the way she did now, genuine, unguarded. "I was born ready, Mr. Cole." He chuckled. "That title still sounds strange." She stepped closer, smoothing the lapel of his jacket. "Then I suppose we will have to keep practicing it." Later, at the foundation's ribbon-cutting ceremony, reporters gathered once again, but this time their questions were kind. Ethan stood beside Clara as she spoke to the crowd. "This place was built on second chances," she said. "Because sometimes, the people who lose everything are the ones who know exactly how to rebuild." Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. "And because one act of kindness, a ride on a rainy night, can change more than one life." The audience applauded, many unaware of how literal those words were. When the ceremony ended, Ethan led her away from the flashing cameras to the garden behind the building. There, beneath the old oak tree, he held out his hand. "You ready for one more promise?" She tilted her head, curious. "Another contract?" He smiled softly. "No. A vow." She placed her hand in his. "Then say it." He took a breath. "I promise that no matter where the road takes us, I will always come back to you." Her eyes shimmered as she whispered, "Then we are already home." They kissed, and for a moment, the world around them faded, the city, the noise, the past. All that remained was the quiet hum of life beginning again. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Clara looked at the old taxi in the distance. Do you ever miss driving? She asked. Ethan grinned. Every day. But the view from here is better. She laughed softly, linking her arm through his. Together they walked back toward the foundation, where families were beginning to arrive, their voices filling the air with hope. It was no longer about wealth or survival or reputation, it was about love that had been tested and proven real. And as the first evening lights flickered across the city, Ethan realized something simple yet profound. He had not just driven her home that night a year ago, he had driven himself there too.